let's consider a little bit more detailed aspects of understanding the Mahadashas. And this is coming from chapter 48 from Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra, which is entitled The Distinctive Effects of the Nakshatra Dasha, or the Dashas of the Lords of Various Houses. And this is a brief summary or an overview to give you some principles to consider. So please get a pen and paper out, or your notepad, whatever it might be, and go through this video slowly, writing down the principles as you go. This is an important part of study, and anyone who wants to become a good astrologer needs to not only listen to talks such as this, but also to record and write down and think about and contemplate bit by bit the information that is shared, so that you can get it into your consciousness. It's the only way I feel that you can do astrology well. And remember that this chapter 48, this is my version that I use of Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra. I do have two other versions, I think, and they label these chapters a little bit different. So if you have a copy of Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra, and it's not the same version I have, the chapter number might be off. But this is chapter 48, the distinctive effects of the Nakshatra Dasha, or the Dashas of the Lords of Various Houses. Now, Parashara goes on to state, after we've covered all of the Mahadashas in general, all the planets, Sun, Moon, Mars, Rahu, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Ketu, Saturn, so on. If the Lord of the 10th be placed in an auspicious house, in his sign of exaltation, his dasha effect will be favorable. The effects will be adverse if the Lord of the 10th is in his sign of debilitation and occupies an inauspicious house. This proves that an inauspicious planet in his sign of exaltation will not produce unfavorable results if placed in an auspicious house, and a benefic, being in his sign of debilitation and being posited in an inauspicious house, will give adverse effects. Now I will describe the effects of the dasha of the lords of various houses who are related to each other. So with this particular phrase, essentially what it's saying is that you can have a benefic planet in bad dignity in a bad house that gives bad results. You can have a malefic planet in good dignity in a house that is helpful to that planet, supportive of that planet, that gives good results. So once more, we see that it is required that we understand how to judge whether a planet is doing well or not, and our foundational knowledge of astrology needs to be somewhat thorough before we can really put all that together well. And this is coming from volume 2 of Brihat Parashar Hora Shastra, so he is assuming that you know the basics before we've gotten to this point. Now, verses 2 and 4 of chapter 48. There will be physical well-being in the dasha of the Lord of the Ascendant, distress and possibility of death in the dasha of the Lord of the Second, unfavorable effects in the dasha of the Lord of the Third, acquisition of a house and land in the dasha of the Lord of the Fourth, progress in educational sphere and happiness from children in the dasha of the Fifth, danger from enemies and ill health in the dasha of the Sixth. And all of this makes sense as a general principle, because each of these houses rule over either auspicious or inauspicious things, and we can see that the houses, the numbers that are listed, he relates them to their specific indicators as we should know them. Verses 5 through 8. There will be distress to wife and the possibility of death of the native in the dasha of the Lord of the Seventh, possibility of death and financial loss in the dasha of the Eighth. Now, we do see that he associates the possibility of distress and death to the dashas of the Lord of the Second and of the Seventh. And why is that? Because they're maraka houses. They're considered to be killer houses, houses that causes some suffering. Again, other things have to support this difficulty for that to be true, so we can't just hands down say that that's the way it's going to be. It has to be supported by multiple angles within the chart itself for either the good or the bad to occur. To continue, improvement in educational sphere, religious mindedness, and unexpected gains of wealth in the dasha of the Lord of the Ninth, recognition from and awards by government in the Dasha of the Lord of the 10th, obstacles and gains of wealth and possibility of disease in the Dasha of the Lord of the 11th. So why wealth and disease? Well, the 11th is actually a disease-causing house, but it's also a house of wealth, so these things can happen simultaneously. And distress and danger from diseases in the Dasha of the Lord of the 12th. A planet posited in an auspicious house, like a trikona, at the commencement of the Dasha, produces favorable results in his Dasha. So we've already discussed this in our previous talks, specifically I think the first one of this series, where we saw that when a Dasha begins, say you're in a Mercury Dasha, and when that Dasha begins, you look to see where is Mercury at the moment that Dasha begins by transit. If he's exalted in his own home, that makes the Dasha work better. If he's debilitated in an enemy sign, it makes that Dasha work worse. So it's going to be true for all Dashas. The planet posited in the 6th, the 8th, or the 12th at that time, the beginning of the Dasha, so the planet where it's placed by transit at the beginning of the Dasha, if it's in the 6th, 8th, or 12th, yields only adverse results during its Dasha. It is therefore essential that the placement of a planet at the time of birth and at the commencement of the Dasha should both be taken into account for the assessment of Dasha effects. So if it's good, excellent, you're supported. If it's bad, you want to explore some remedial measures to help you prepare for that so that you can neutralize that karma before it becomes overwhelming to you, overpowering to you. And that might take a lot of work. But again, it's just as though if someone asks you, how do I get to California? And you say, go west. And they say, well, how long do I go west for? Well, if they want to get to California, you say, until you get there. Same thing with remedial measures. Don't ask how long, because again, remedial measures in a sense are beyond the chart itself. They're not going to be reflected once you begin them, because the birth chart is the reflection of all your karmas up until the moment you were born. So everything you do after that is setting the stage for your future. So don't ask how long it's going to take for your remedial measures. Just do them until the results occur. Now we'll go on to verses 9 through 13, according to Parashara and understanding the Mahadashas. If the Lord of the 9th and 10th be in conjunction with the Lord of the 5th, their dashas produce beneficial results. If any other planet be associated with the Lord of the 5th, his dasha will be favorable. So any planets associated with the Lord of the 5th, that planet associated with the Lord of the 5th will typically be better. The dashas of the Lords of the 10th and 4th produce favorable effects if they be associated with the Lords of the 9th. If the Lord of a Kendra be in a Trikona, or the Lord of a Trikona be in a Kendra, their dasha proves extremely favorable. So go back, rewind, write these things down. These are excellent principles to have in your astrological toolbox. So verses 14 through 17. The dasha of the lords of the 6th, the 8th, or the 12th also become favorable if they get associated with the lord of a Trikona. If the lord of a Kendra be in a Trikona, or the lord of a Trikona in a Kendra, the dasha of the planet associated with either of them becomes favorable. The dasha of a planet aspected by the lord of a Kendra or Trikona is also favorable. So we see how these trines are very helpful. If the lord of the 9th be in the ascendant and the lord of the ascendant be in the 9th, the dashas of both of them will produce extremely beneficial results. There will be acquisition of a kingdom, or we can see that as attainment of high positions, in the dashas of the lords of the ascendant and the 10th, if the lord of the 10th be in the ascendant and the lord of the ascendant be in the 10th. So we have these mutual combinations of 1st in the 9th, 9th in the 1st, 1st in the 10th, 10th in the 1st. This gives favorable results, generally speaking. And the final verses in this particular chapter. The dasha of the lord of the 3rd, 6th, and 11th of the planets posited in them, and of the planets in conjunction, with them will prove unfavorable. The dasha of the planets associated with the lords of a Marika house, namely the 2nd and 7th, in the 2nd or 7th, and of the planet posited in the 8th, will produce unfavorable results. Thus, the dasha should be considered favorable after taking into account the placement of a planet and his relationship of one planet with the other. So as we can see, there's a lot to consider, and when I first read this, and I'm sure maybe you're experiencing this too, if this is your first time, you're thinking, this is just making my head spin. There's so much to consider there. This means that, that means this. But this is helping to expand your mind so that you can think like an astrologer. And the more you think about it, the more you review it, the more you write it down, the more you introduce yourself to it repeatedly, you'll read these kinds of things or hear someone talk about them, and you won't just have your head spinning. You will understand, okay, I need to break these things down in certain pieces, and it helps your brain develop, your consciousness develop. It helps you be a better person overall. It helps you think more clearly, because not only do you have to think concretely, but you also have to learn to think abstractly. And this final sentence, thus the dasha should be considered favorable after taking into account the placement of a planet and his relationship of one planet with the other. So for anyone to teach astrology, to discuss every possible combination, we would never get done reading about it. We would have encyclopedias and encyclopedias of possible combinations. And so we have to remember, in a lot of these books like Brihat Parashara Horashastra, Jaimini Sutras, a lot of what's stated is giving you information so that you can deduce or infer the rest on your own. So the things that we just went over, those are just some basic, obvious principles. But that last line, where you have to consider the relationship of one planet to another, he's essentially telling you, yes, use these basic principles, but also consider, as we mentioned in the very first video of this series, we're not just looking at the dasha of the planet in the 8th, or we're not just looking at the dasha of the 10th. We need to consider, where is that planet in relationship to every other planet? Where is that planet in relationship to every other cusp or house? Where is that planet in relationship to every varga? And that's where you're going to get the specifics of what the dasha will mean for you, which is why we can't just use a cookie-cutter approach of, you are in Moon Dasha, it means this. You are in Rahu Dasha, it means this. You are in the Dasha of the 9th Lord, it means this. You are in the Dasha of the Lord of the 6th, it means this. There will be generalities you can extract from that, but they won't be, they will probably be accurate for anybody at any point in time, which is why you have to really understand these principles, commit them to memory, and then pay attention to the, not the mechanics of the principles, but the energy of the principles, the way they work. Because if you can figure out how one principle works according to what Brihat Parashara Horashastra has just gone over, you can deduce and infer those to other aspects of the chart. So you're learning to think like an astrologer, not just regurgitate what you've been told, but to actually look at the chart and apply the principles of it, not just the rote memorization. So go back and review all these videos so far. Commit to memory, write down, take notes, what seems important. Look at multiple charts as you go through so that you can get a sense of how these principles work. Think about how they might work in other situations, in other ways. That will help you to become a much better astrologer. So this will conclude, for certain this time, our section on the dashas, the Nakshatra Dasha, Vimshottari, in regards to the planets themselves. And the next section, the next 12 videos, I believe, will be focused on learning to interpret the houses so that you can tie these things together to get more detailed information about your chart and the timing and trends of one's life. So thank you very much.